The iron chains bite into her ankles. Through the narrow window, she can hear the carpenter building the execution platform in the market square. But the flames are still days away. What happens between accusation and execution would prove far more terrible than the fire itself. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe and the American colonies. Most were women. Most were innocent, and every single one endured systematic degradation and torture designed to break them long before the executioner lit the public arrest of suspected witches. The knock came without warning. Across Europe, the arrest of a suspected witch was staged as public theater. Local authorities, accompanied by ministers or priests, would seize the accused in broad daylight. This was the first act of psychological warfare. The journey from home to holding cell became a gauntlet of abuse. Villagers who had known the accused for decades suddenly felt empowered to music spit, throw refuse, or hurl accusations. The transformation from neighbor to pariah happened in minutes. In German territories under the Constitutio Criminalis Carolina of 1530, judges could initiate prosecution on their own authority. The accused became subject to a magistrate who served simultaneously as investigator, prosecutor, and judge. There was no impartiality. Women formed roughly 80% of those accused, most over age 40. They were midwives, healers, widows without male protection, or women who had made enemies. The accusations followed predictable patterns: cursing neighbors, consorting with the devil, and causing crop failures. Misfortune demanded explanation, and the accused provided convenient scapegoats. Public humiliation, stocks, shackles, and shame before the flames. Before any trial, the accused faced deliberate public degradation. The stocks and pillory stood in every town square, wooden frames that immobilized victims by ankles, wrists, or neck. Locked in the stocks, the accused became public property. Passersby were encouraged to mock and abuse them. Rotten vegetables were the kindest projectiles. Refuse, debris, and mud, mixed with stones, all found their way to the defenseless figure. Some remained in stocks for days, denied food or water, and forced to soil themselves while crowds jeered. The pillory added another dimension of suffering. With head and hands thrust through wooden holes, victims stood bent forward in agonizing positions. The crowds could turn violent. Projectiles sometimes followed when mob fury peaked. Several victims perished while locked in restraints that prevented any defense. Heavy iron chains bound wrists and ankles. Prisoners were paraded through streets in these restraints, their shuffling progress drawing crowds. The psychological impact was calculated and complete. The witch tests are drowning, weighing, and other cruel proofs. With the accused already broken by public shame, authorities turned to supposed tests that would prove guilt through divine judgment. The swimming test derived from ancient practices and gained Christian justification through baptismal theology. Water, being the pure element of baptism, would reject those who had rejected God. The logic was deadly. Innocence meant drowning. Guilt meant survival. The accused would be reduced to minimal clothing, her hands tied. A rope around her waist supposedly allowed rescue, but accidental drownings were common. Then she was cast into the nearest pond or river. If she sank, she was innocent. If she floated, she was guilty. The test ignored physics. Clothing trapped air. Natural buoyancy varied. Matthew Hopkins used the swimming test extensively during his terror campaign from 1644 to 1647. Pricking for the devil S mark represented another grotesque practice. Satan supposedly marked his servants with a spot that felt no pain and would not bleed. The accused would be completely unclothed and examined before witnesses. Then begin systematic testing with sharp implements. Professional prickers emerged. Many frauds who used retractable needles that never drew blood. The victim tested dozens or hundreds of times with needles, had no defense. Touch tests relied on possessed individuals who recovered when the accused touched them, proving the accused had caused the possession. Even reciting scripture became a test. Any stumble in the Lord's Prayer was recorded as proof the devil prevented holy words. Isolation and starvation, breaking the spirit before the body. Between arrest and trial, the accused languished in conditions designed to destroy them from within. Medieval prisons were holding cells where human beings were reduced to shadows. Stone-walled cells, small and damp, held the accused in nearly complete darkness. Sanitation did not exist. Human waste accumulated. Vermin thrived. Cold penetrated in winter, while summer heat turned cells into suffocating boxes. Food and water came irregularly, designed for survival, not sustenance. Many found themselves abandoned, their relatives too frightened to help. Starvation worked slowly, weakening bodies and minds. Heavy iron shackles remained in place throughout imprisonment, chained to walls. Sleep became torture. The constant weight of iron left deep wounds that festered. Isolation magnified every horror. Days and nights blurred into endless darkness, torture chambers and confessions. The dark methods of extraction. When isolation failed to produce confessions, authorities escalated to music direct torture. Under inquisitorial legal systems, confession was required for conviction. Since witchcraft left no evidence, torture became the tool for obtaining necessary admissions. The legal frameworks provided detailed prescriptions for when and how torture could be applied. The Malus Maleficarum, written in 1486, stressed the importance of confession while noting the stubborn silence of witches. Torture was justified as necessary to overcome demonic influence that supposedly kept witches from admitting their crimes. Sleep deprivation was most common, used extensively because it was effective and left no marks. The accused would be kept awake for days through constant questioning, prodding, or being forced to walk endlessly in circles. Interrogators worked in shifts, ensuring the victim never rested. After sufficient time without sleep, the mind began to fracture. Hallucinations emerged. Simple questions became incomprehensible. Resistance crumbled. Many confessed to anything simply to be allowed a few moments of sleep, knowing full well that confession meant death, but finding the prospect preferable to continued torment. The strappado involved tying the victim's hands behind their back and hoisting them into the air by their wrists. The shoulders gave way immediately, the sudden separation producing agony that never faded. The victim would hang suspended, their own body weight creating relentless pressure. Sometimes weights were attached to the legs, increasing the strain. The torture could be prolonged for hours, with the victim being raised and dropped repeatedly. Each drop wrenched the damaged shoulders further. Each suspension extended the suffering. The rack represented the most infamous torture device. Victims were tied to a wooden frame by wrists and ankles, then stretched as rollers pulled their limbs in opposite directions. The pain began as unbearable pressure, then escalated beyond comprehension as joints gave way. The torturer could control the speed, making it gradual or sudden. Anascu, condemned for heresy in 1546, endured the rack until she could no longer move and had to be carried in a chair to her execution at the stake. Thumb screws, simple but devastatingly effective, compressed fingers between metal plates. The design prevented victims from passing out while ensuring prolonged agony. Interrogators could gradually increase pressure, making each question more unbearable than the last. The screws would be tightened slowly, allowing time for answers between each turn that brought fresh waves of pain. Under such conditions, confessions became inevitable. But torture did not end with admission. Authorities demanded more. Names of other witches, descriptions of Sabbaths attended, and detailed accounts of pacts made with Satan. The accused, desperate to end their suffering, would implicate neighbors, friends, and even family members. This created cascading accusations that spread witch hunts through entire regions like wildfire. In Bamberg, Germany, between 1626 and 1631. Approximately 900 people were burned after torture produced ever-expanding lists of conspirators. Each confession led to new arrests, each new arrest to fresh torture, and each torture to more names. Execution by burning in town squares. After weeks or months of suffering, the accused finally faced the flames. But even execution was designed as a public spectacle and final degradation. End before burning. Others faced the flames, fully conscious. The execution platform was erected in the town's central square, ensuring maximum visibility. Construction began days in advance, the sound of hammering a constant reminder to the imprisoned of what awaited. Crowds gathered hours before the scheduled execution, claiming the best vantage points. What followed was carefully orchestrated theater designed to reinforce social order through the most visceral demonstration of power. The condemned was led to the stake in a procession that transformed their final walk into a public ritual. Often they were dressed in special garments or marked with symbols of their supposed crime. Some were forced to wear signs listing their offenses. Music. The crowd's reaction varied. Some jerked and threw objects. Others watched in silence, perhaps wondering if they might be next. All were bound to the wooden post. Their bodies were lashed tight to prevent escape or even movement. The method of burning varied significantly by region, each variation carrying its own horror. In some areas, wood was piled around the victim's feet, allowing flames to overtake them slowly from below. This method could take considerable time, the victim remaining conscious and screaming as fire advanced up their body. The crowd would hear everything and see everything, the spectacle serving as the ultimate deterrent. In other regions, particularly in Germany and parts of France, wood was stacked high around the entire body to hide the victim's suffering from spectators while intensifying the heat. This created a more complete inferno that killed more quickly, but also prevented the crowd from witnessing the full extent of the victim's final moments. A third method involved binding the victim to a ladder that was then swung into existing flames, combining the suddenness of immersion with the sustained burning. The agony defied description. Smoke inhalation sometimes brought death before the flames overtook them, a mercy when it occurred. The victim would suffocate from the thick smoke, losing consciousness before feeling the full extent of the fire. More often, victims remained conscious as flames overtook them. Their screams filled the square, echoing off surrounding buildings, a sound witnesses would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Joan of Arc, burned in 1431 in Rouen, reportedly died from smoke inhalation before the flames reached her. Though this small grace came only after she had already endured months of imprisonment and a politically motivated trial. Not all regions burned witches. In England and the American colonies, hanging was the standard method of execution for convicted witches. Legal traditions dating back centuries specified hanging for felonies, and witchcraft fell under this category. During the Salem witch trials of 1692, 19 people were hanged on Gallows Hill, their bodies left to swing as warnings. One man, Giles Corey, suffered a different fate entirely, crushed under heavy stones until death when he refused to enter a plea. A punishment designed to extract cooperation, but which he endured in silence until his death. Bodies were often left on display after execution. In cases of burning, ashes might be scattered or buried in unmarked graves, denying proper Christian burial. The true horror of the witch trials lay in their systematic nature. Communities transformed neighbors into monsters through procedures that revealed humanity at its darkest. Fear, superstition, and malice combined to create a machinery of persecution that destroyed tens of thousands of lives. Every stage was documented, regulated, and approved by authorities who believed they were serving justice. These women and men were not witches. They were victims of their neighbors' fears, their community's need for scapegoats, and legal systems that demanded confessions regardless of truth. When you consider the suffering inflicted on accused witches before they ever reached the flames, ask yourself, which was more terrifying? the community's willingness to torture their neighbors, or their insistence that they were serving justice. The fires that consumed the accused have long since turned to ash, but the machinery of persecution they represent never truly disappeared.